Welcome back, guys. One more video of actual notes to take before I come back, so hopefully you've enjoyed this time together, digitally speaking. We've got one last thing to cover, and that is how we are going to compare two sets of data. So let's just jump right in here. The basic idea is that the type of chart that we use, so whether we use a histogram or we use a box and whisker plot, is going to depend on the distribution of the data that we're analyzing. Okay, so again, basically it's going to come down to whether or not the data is skewed or not, or in other words, whether the data is normal or symmetric or not, and that's going to help us determine if we want to use that 5 number summary and the box and whisker plot, or if we want to use mean and standard deviation and a histogram. So that said, let's look at it. Case 1. Data set number 1 has a normal distribution, and data set number 2 also has a normal distribution. If both of those things are true, then we are going to use the histogram along with the mean and standard deviation. Okay, get that down. Data set 1 and 2 are both normal, histogram, mean, standard deviation. Pause if you need to. Case number 2, we have the first set of data is skewed, and the second set of data is skewed. Now, before we move on, this can be positively skewed or negatively skewed. One could be positive, one could be negative. They could both be positive, they could both be negative. But the idea is if they're both skewed, we're going to use the box and whisker plot along with the 5 number summary. Now, the reason for this is that if your data is skewed positively or negatively, the mean can get changed really quickly and give you some really bad information. So like, for example, if I'm looking at student test scores, okay, and my class average, comes out to like a D plus, but then I go and I look at the data and I've got like 2 or 3 kids who turned it in blank and 4 or 5 more kids maybe who just filled in 2, or they weren't here for 4 or 5 days and so they didn't really know what they were doing, they just guessed a whole bunch. Well, that data is going to come out and it's going to be fairly skewed negatively. The mean is going to get affected a lot by that. The median, on the other hand, won't get affected as much. Okay, the median will still come pretty close to that middle that I'm looking for to kind of give me an idea of how my students are doing. So that's why, if it is normal, we can use the histogram, we can get that average, use a standard deviation and get some really good information from it. But once the data gets skewed, then it really helps to use the median instead. So that's why we like to use the box and whisker plot when we have skewed data. Now, the third case then, of course, is if one set of data is normal and the other set of data is skewed. Well, since one set of data is skewed, we are still going to want to use that box and whisker plot. And it's for the same reasons I just talked about, okay? The median doesn't get messed up as much by an outlier. So again, if all of my students are doing okay and then 1 or 2 kids are just really bombing it, or on the other end of the spectrum, all my kids are really struggling, but there's like 2 kids who are just super geniuses and they could learn this stuff without me, and so they got 100% on everything just because they walked in the door that day. It's going to mess up my data. At least it's going to mess up the mean. So if we have skewed data and we look at our distribution and it looks positively or negatively skewed, we want to go ahead and use the box and whisker plot. And guess what? That's really all we're covering today. The problems you're going to be asked today is it's going to give you 2 sets of data. It's going to ask you to look at both sets of data, either using a box and whisker plot or a histogram, and you're going to have to determine from looking at those charts if it's skewed or not. And if they're both normal, you need to give the standard deviation and the mean. And if one or both of them is skewed, you need to give the 5 number summary. Okay? And that's all they're going to ask you to do. Okay, look at both sets of data, determine if they're normal or skewed, and either give the mean and standard deviation or the 5 number summary based on that information. Okay, that's it. I hope you guys have enjoyed the lesson videos. We've only got 1 or 2 other things you're going to hear me talk about, but the rest will be pretty independent. So work hard, stay focused. I'll be back soon. Love you guys.